This is East Asia Tonight.
Good evening, I'm Lopez for tonight's top stories. Goals reached on many fronts with a very specific focus on the economy. North Korea's leader using the start of a once-in-5-year party congress to underscore policy priorities beyond nuclear weapons. Sorry, but not sorry. South Korea's Yoon not budging from his original position that his call for martial law in 2024 was based on the needs of the nation. Takaichi delivers her first policy speech since reappointment as Prime Minister, a mandate from recent elections giving her weight to overhaul, as she has promised, strategy on national defense. Also in Japan, inflation cooling below the BOJ's 2% target, a boost for PM Takaichi as she vows to rein in soaring prices. And also on this bulletin, the US-China rivalry playing out across Africa, Beijing's growing footprint on the continent raising larger questions about its longer-term ambitions. And why do Chinese drug makers prefer to license their discoveries to multinationals rather than taking them global themselves? CNA's senior correspondent Tan Yu-Guan finds out in the second of a three-part series on China's pharma industry. The once-in-5-year Congress for North Korea's ruling party has begun. Thousands of Workers' Party delegates meeting in Pyongyang for several days starting yesterday to review progress and to look ahead. Leader Kim Jong-un delivering the opening address in which he described the past 5 years as a proud period which has seen a strengthening of positions at home and abroad. Mr. Kim likely to use this meeting to lay out priorities for the economy and military development, which could include closer coordination between nuclear and conventional forces. The leader laying the groundwork for what could come out of the Congress with recent focus on construction and industrial projects, inspecting housing developments and factory sites, but not neglecting the weapons program, unveiling new hardware, including multiple rocket launchers the state media says can carry nuclear warheads. And who comes after him also drawing attention. Reportedly, teenage daughter Ju A has made public appearances at his side, fueling speculation that she could receive official anointment as his potential successor. And we're joined by Gordon Kang. He's senior analyst at the S. Rajaratnam School of International Studies at Nanyang Technological University. Thanks for joining us this evening, Mr. Kang. Now, this Congress, if we look at past Congresses, could last 8 days. We are just at day 2 today. Mr. Kim has called this a success the last 5 years, but the need to work for future success. Beyond the rhetorical need to talk up progress, how would you assess this declaration of success?
Thanks for the opportunity, Wisu. So I think this is a pretty unique juncture of North Korean domestic politics. The Party Congress is a significant moment for North Korea to articulate a strategic approach towards national development and for its foreign policy for both its domestic and external audiences. And I think the past few years has seen North Korea manage to achieve quite a few objectives that were listed out in the 8th Party Congress. So I think in the next few days, we should expect to see continuity in terms of how North Korea has achieved the objectives it has set forth in the past. And I think we would expect to see a huge focus of that to be in terms of economic development and utilizing the opportunity that it has managed to create in terms of it managed to leverage in terms of its relationships with China and Russia to help push through these national policies.
All right. The creating of opportunities from strong relationships with both Moscow and Beijing. How has North Korea done this?
Well, I think it was in part also a spirit of opportunism and pragmatism that has been underlying Kim Jong-un's era thus far, and definitely has become more visible over the past few years. Over the COVID-19 pandemic, North Korea instituted a even stricter lockdown than what was implemented in the past. And I think alongside other developments in the geopolitical arena, with Russia's invasion of Ukraine and intensifying US-China strategic competition, I think North Korea found itself in a position where they would utilize its kind of asymmetric space to really leverage their relations with Russia and China. And so we have seen this in terms of the comprehensive strategic partnership with Russia. And we have also seen, for example, strengthened ties with Beijing last year with Kim Jong-un's visit to Beijing. So I think from this, we have seen essentially North Korea be quite pragmatic and quite effective in how it intends to utilize its relations.
So effective playing of strengths and weaknesses in terms of its asymmetric position. But as you suggest, these are temporary. These conditions could change as well. For example, Russia's war in Ukraine could end, perhaps not necessarily in Russia's favor. US-China tensions could ease, with both sides finding need for compromise and agreement. Where does that leave North Korea?
Well, I think North Korea has historically always been on the precipice of such strategic judgments. If we look back towards the Cold War, North Korea has also had to essentially balance its relations between the Soviet Union and China, alongside its considerations of South Korea and the US. So this is something that North Korea is not uncomfortable with or not unfamiliar with. I think the biggest differences in the geopolitical dynamics today is the unique factors such as President Trump's administration, the different kind of strategic calculations that are developing there. And also, I think the interesting developments as well was North Korea's essentially institutionalization of South Korea as a hostile state, and removing reunification as a strategic goal. So I think this does introduce different dynamics into the equation, and in a way, it almost simplifies it current context. But of course, we note as well that in the opening address, the US wasn't specifically mentioned, and neither was Trump, right? And so this could be read or interpreted as possibly leaving space for interaction and engagement in the future. But again, this would require quite unique and complex circumstances.
All right, this Congress, one more thing people are looking out for is what, as you suggest, might be the tone or the message on both Washington and Seoul. We have seen nothing in at least the opening address. Is that likely to change? Is there any reason why North Korea might soften its stance on South Korea?
I think that's an interesting question. I guess we'll have to wait and find out. But at present, North Korea, Kim Jong-un has stated that North Korea was able to make a turn and consolidate its external position. And I think this can be read as essentially intending to commit to its strategic partnerships and its relations with China and Russia. So I don't particularly foresee a drastic change to be announced with this Ninth Party Congress regarding South Korea or the US.
Okay,
I think there
question
will be
here.
quite a bit of continuity in this region.
All right, final question, Mr. Kang. We look at South Korea and Washington because these are the usual parties to look at in terms of relations with North Korea. But of course, North Korea looking to find and establish its place internationally, which would include how it relates, for example, to countries closer to home in Singapore, so Southeast Asia. Do you see any change in how we might engage with Pyongyang?
Yes, well, I think this kind of leads as well to an interesting question at the moment, which is how will engagement with North Korea change in the coming years, especially when international organizations have not been able to enter the country and been able to reestablish the networks which they have built up over the past few decades. North Korea as well is also possibly looking to leverage its ties with China and Russia to instead get the kind of developmental assistance and aid and the technology transfer that they require. So for states like Southeast Asia, states in Southeast Asia, which have seen strengthening relations with Pyongyang over the past 2 years, that it becomes an interesting kind of development or evolution as to how we can utilize our neutral and constructive ties in the space that we have within ASEAN, the mechanisms that we have, for example, the ASEAN Regional Forum, to essentially look at, to essentially approach this new kind of strategic approach that North Korea is developing with this 9th Party Congress.
Oh, thanks for joining us, Mr. Gordon Kang. He's senior analyst at the S. Rajaranam School of International Studies at NTU right here in Singapore. Former South Korean President Yoon has made a qualified apology for his declaration in 2024 of martial law, a day after receiving a sentence for life in prison on the charge of insurrection. In a statement released by his lawyers, Yoon said that while he is sorry for the frustration and hardship as a consequence of his actions, he still maintains he acted with sincerity and for, quote, the sake of the nation. The court reaching its verdict after deciding the decree had posed a threat to the country while leaving in its wake enormous social costs. The presiding judge also said Yoon showed no remorse during proceedings and at times had refused to appear in court without producing valid reasons. Yoon declaring his sentence hard to accept given that he sees it as predetermined by political retaliation. It remains unclear if he will appeal this verdict and, if not, if he is eligible for parole. Japan's Prime Minister has pledged to break away from excessive austerity and boost investment while seeking to reassure markets over her big spending plans. Sanai Takaichi was addressing Parliament following a landslide victory in snap polls earlier this month. CNA senior correspondent Michi Ishida tells us more.
Japanese Prime Minister Sanai Takaichi pledged to push the switch for economic growth in her first policy speech since her re-election as the nation's leader. She said there is no future in a country without growth and if a government does not take on challenges. She laid out challenges including spurring investment, which she said Japan lacked, highlighting the need to ensure economic security, food security, and energy security to build a stronger nation. She also called for investment in areas including cybersecurity and artificial intelligence.
高市内閣は長年続いてきた過度な緊縮志向、未来への投資不足の流れを断ち切ります。
Repeating her campaign pledge in snap polls earlier this month, Ms. Takaichi said she will look at laying out a schedule to suspend the 8% sales tax on food items for 2 years. She responded to concerns raised over her plans for aggressive spending, vowing to lower debt to GDP ratio. Japan's national debt is more than twice the size of its GDP, the highest ratio among industrialized nations.
マーケットからの信任を損なう野放図な財政政策を取るわけではありません。
On regional issues, Ms. Takaichi criticized Beijing for what she called its unilateral attempt to change the status quo in the East China Sea and South China Sea, and highlighted growing Chinese coercion as tensions between Japan and China remain high.
サプライチェーン上流の物資を管理下に置くことで自国の主張に他国を従わせようとする経済的威圧の動きが顕在化しています。サイバー、海洋、宇宙空間における競争も激化しています。我が国の戦略的自立性、不可欠性を確保する必要性が一層増大しています。
Pointing to what she called a severe and complex environment, Ms. Takaichi said the government will revise Japan's 3 core security documents this year to produce a new defense strategy. In terms of domestic policies, she said she will not tolerate illegal immigration and will lay out rules for the purchase of real estate by foreigners. The Prime Minister pledged to act on key policies agreed with the ruling Liberal Democratic Party's ally, the Japan Innovation Party, with the coalition now holding some 2/3 of seats in the lower house. Michio Ishida, CNA, Tokyo.
Still ahead on this bulletin, possibly fresh tailwinds to Prime Minister Takaichi's economic revival. Manufacturing activity hits its fastest pace in about 4 years in February. As a major rethink at NVIDIA, the chip giant trimming its planned $100 billion investment in OpenAI to $30 billion. It's time for business news with Roland Lim. Roland, inflation figures, some welcome relief for Prime Minister Sanai Takaichi.
That's right, Wei Su. Inflation easing last month gives room for Ms. Takaichi's tax suspension plans. Analysts, meantime, see the Bank of Japan holding short-term rates steady, but a hike may be due middle of the year. Japanese inflation slowed in the month of January in welcome news for Prime Minister Sanai Takaichi after her recent election landslide win. The headline rate fell to its lowest in almost 4 years, dropping below the BOJ's 2% target. It fell to 1.5% last month. That's its lowest since March 2022. Core inflation rate, which excludes fresh food prices, that eased to 2%, and that's the lowest level in 2 years. The drop was largely due to the effect of fuel subsidies, an abolition of gasoline tax surcharges, and the base effect of last year's spike in food prices. Analysts say with price pressures showing signs of softening, the central bank won't be in a rush to resume its hiking cycle. The BOJ ended its massive decade-long stimulus program and began gradually raising rates, including the month of December. Now, that move was based on the view that Japan was making steady progress towards meeting its 2% inflation target. Now, checking in on the market reaction out of Japan following Prime Minister Takaichi's policy speech, where she tried to allay investor concerns about debt. The Japanese yen weakening by 0.25%, 155.36 to the dollar. A sharp declines for the benchmark Nikkei 225, though, snapping a 2-day winning streak. It's down 1.12% for the day. In another encouraging sign for Prime Minister Takaichi's economic revival plans, manufacturing grew at its fastest rate in 4 years, maintaining its expansionary streak for a third month in a row. S&P's Flash Purchasing Managers Index, or PMI, rose to 52.8 this month, and that's up from 51.5 last month, suggesting broad-based growth. Now, this marks the strongest period of growth since May of 2022. Its services sector also saw robust expansion. Remember, a reading above 50 indicates growth in activity. The continued growth in both manufacturing and services is a boost for Prime Minister Sanai Takaichi's government as they ramp up their strategic business investments. The solid readings also aligns with the Bank of Japan's outlook, which highlighted positive business sentiment and high corporate profits. Bank of Japan economists are likely to closely monitor corporate strength as they mull whether or not to move interest rates. NVIDIA is reportedly close to finalizing a $30 billion investment in OpenAI. That's a significant downsize from the chipmaker's earlier commitment of $100 billion in the ChatGPT maker. The Financial Times reports that the two companies are in the final stages of talks and could sign a deal as early as this weekend. Now, OpenAI is currently seeking $100 billion in its latest round of funding, with SoftBank and Amazon set to join in. Now, if the NVIDIA investment goes through, OpenAI will use the funds to purchase NVIDIA hardware for its use in data centers. Concerns have been increasing among investors in the AI sector over its circular structure and a potential bubble forming. Both NVIDIA and OpenAI's chiefs have sought to calm rumors that the relationship between their companies have grown frosty. This after a Wall Street Journal reported last month that NVIDIA's $100 billion commitment did not progress beyond a memorandum of understanding. Hong Kong shares slipping in the local markets reopened after a 3-day Chinese New Year break. Mainland markets, though, still closed for a public holiday. Hang Seng Index fell 0.6%, with tech stocks leading the decline. Well, it's showing on the board 1.1% lower. Meantime, heavyweights Alibaba is down 4.65%, Baidu is down 6.25%, Tencent down by more than 2%. Investors are steering clear of tech stocks amid rising geopolitical tensions between China and the US. The regulatory pressure is also weighing on sentiment. Chinese authorities last week summoned major online platforms, including Alibaba, Baidu, Tencent, and JD.com, urging them to curb aggressive promotions and to end the so-called involution-style competition. Meanwhile, Chinese generative AI startups notching big gains. Zhipu AI, which trades under Knowledge Atlas, rallying 42% today, and Minimax adding 14.5% by the end of the trading day. Both startups went public on the Hong Kong Exchange last month and have risen more than 4 times since. President Trump's cornerstone tariff policies also in focus after the U.S. released its latest trade statistics. December numbers show that despite the president's efforts for the country's overall trade deficit, still barely budged last year. The U.S. ran a total trade deficit of nearly $902 billion for the full year 2025, and that's about 0.2% lower from 24, or around $2.1 billion. On a country-by-country basis, the U.S. saw its annual trade deficit with China shrink to about $202 billion last year, the smallest in more than 2 decades. Meanwhile, going the opposite way, Taiwan's surplus with the U.S. nearly doubled last year, and that's mainly due to the surge in U.S. imports of semiconductors and electronic products to fuel the AI boom, as shippers from Taiwan benefited from tariff exemptions. President Trump has leaned on trade levies since the start of his second term in office as part of his strategy to reduce reliance on foreign goods. This as Mr. Trump tries to correct decades of declines in manufacturing employment. Bloomberg estimates that the effective tariff rate on U.S. imported goods now stands at 13.6%, and that's higher than any point prior to 2025 since the 40s. Now, earlier, Bill Stone from the Glenview Trust Company explained what the latest U.S. trade deficit stats could mean for the wider American economy.
I'll say, first of all, on the margin, it means our fourth quarter GDP numbers that we're going to report tomorrow will be lower than we otherwise thought they would be. That's number one. Number two, I think it just tells you, which we kind of knew going in, is these trade numbers have been extremely noisy based on those tariffs. So, people rush to import in when maybe some of the tariffs get rolled off, and vice versa. So it makes it really hard to do any projections. I'm hopeful that perhaps once we get through this set that will kind of settle down again, particularly any time now we'll get a ruling from our Supreme Court here on the legality of Trump's tariffs. And I think that also will kind of likely settle things down as well. I think Trump was pretty clear of not wanting to count on, what at least I think the U.S. would consider a severe rival of, in some respects, an enemy at some times. So, certainly part of it was not being so reliant on China for some of our supply. So you are seeing the supply chains move to other areas.
And that's your business update at this hour. Wei Sun.
Oh, thanks for that, Roland. Still led on East Asia tonight, China significantly expanding support for Africa in the past years, although mechanisms such as its Belt and Road Initiative, through its such initiatives, could the U.S. ambition stand in the way of that? We get insights from one expert in just a moment. This is East Asia Tonight, and these are the headlines. North Korea's ruling Workers' Party Congress convenes, with leader Kim Jong-un praising 5 years of achievement in the economy, defense, and diplomacy. Succession speculation also building as to whether his daughter Ju-ae could receive an official post. China's Prime Minister gives her first policy speech since her party's landslide general election victory earlier this month. Sanai Takaichi once again pushing forward her controversial policy of aggressive fiscal spending. Former South Korean President Yoon apologizes for his 2024 declaration of martial law, but not budging from his original position. South Sudan may be on the verge of a return to civil war with the collapse of a fragile peace deal. But in the pre-colonial kingdom of Azande, China continues to support local communities with investment in the restive region. Patrick Oyat filed this report for CNA from South Sudan.
The Western Azande Kingdom in southwestern South Sudan recently received 22 new tractors and farming equipment. The donation came from Chinese developer Jiao Tai Group and is part of efforts to deepen China's South Sudan ties.
Our
president also asked all of us to cultivate.
The king believes the path to peace is through the soil, and using commercial farming to provide jobs can pull young men away from armed groups and reduce localized conflict.
China is willing to share development experience and opportunities with South Sudan to strengthen cooperation in agriculture and other fields and help South Sudan's economic diversification.
Beijing has positioned itself as a supporter of local agriculture, part of what analysts say is part of its broader strategy in this vast and conflicted country.
China's investment in South Sudan dates back to the 1990s, long before the civil war that led to the country's independence in 2011, and another after that. No stranger to turmoil in this country, China is the largest investor in South Sudan, especially in its oil sector.
But recent renewed fighting between government and opposition forces is raising the risk of a return to full-blown conflict.
We are perilously close to a civil war than we were 5 to 6 years ago. We are in a situation where the peace agreement is in threat.
China has long maintained that South Sudan's stability is in its interest, but its stated position is to avoid direct political meddling, focusing instead on development aid, infrastructure investment, and local support. That's winning over people in this part of the country, where the hope is that the worst of the fighting won't find its way here.
Here in South Sudan also, the warring parties are not targeting the foreigners. The foreigners are not a part of the targets, like many areas in Africa where you get the warring parties seize the properties and swap projects. No, people here are aware of that. China is a friend of the people of South Sudan, more of being a close friend to the government.
That friendship extends beyond oil and agriculture. China has also long supported the healthcare system in South Sudanese capital, including an expansion project for the Juba Teaching Hospital that adds a new complex, specialized units, and hundreds of additional beds. Every year, Chinese medical personnel arrive in Juba, providing bedside care to patients.
They had also conducted trainings, and these trainings are of different categories. There are trainings that were conducted here in the country, and then we have also a number of trainings that we have our people sent out to have the training in China.
Beijing is also supporting the education sector by renovating schools, donating textbooks, training teachers, and providing university scholarships in China for South Sudanese students.
We will work with the South Sudanese side with the guidance of the everlasting spirit of China-Africa friendship to deepen the cooperation between our two countries in the education sector, enhance the cultural exchange, and build a China-Africa community with a shared future.
From schools to hospitals, oil fields to farms, the message is clear. Conflict or not, China is positioning itself here for the long haul. For CNA, I am Patrick Oyet in Juba, South Sudan.
Dr. Alessandro Arduino joins us. He's Associate Fellow for International Security in the Royal United Services Institute. He joins us from London. Dr. Arduino, China, we just heard in that package that positioning itself for the long haul, it's not just positioning itself, it has been there for the long haul, both economically and also on security.
Yes, definitely. The example that you just show with South Sudan showcase how China is an integrated and very important economic actor for a lot of countries in Africa. But what is going on now in South Sudan also reflects that a lot of areas in the region are under high risk of civil war and security strain. Therefore, what is happening now is not just China being a well-known economic juggernaut, but also quite, I have to say, under the radar, expanding its role as Africa's security landscape is changing, and it's changing very fast.
How is it managing to do this under the radar? So not exactly deploying troops on the ground, and apart from one base in Djibouti, does not have, in fact, any military bases on the African continent.
Yes, in this respect, as the world at global level is changing quite fast, the balance between power, Africa, and unfortunately, I have to say, in the West and also in the Far East, we are not looking very closely about the prospect of growing insecurity with huge conflict like the one in Sudan or the ongoing civil war in Libya. China is slowly deepening, as I said, under the radar, its security footprint. France, who was one of the previous security guarantor, has been unceremoniously kicked out of the sub-Saharan Sahel with an increase of jihadist violence and transnational terrorist activity that included ISIS and Al-Qaeda. Other countries are stepping in, like Russia, with the mercenary of the Wagner Group, now labeled Africa Corps, from Mali to Niger to the Central African Republic. Turkey is exporting drone and private military company, and at the same time, the United States, who in the past was the leading security umbrella in the region, let's say it's more distracted, especially looking at the new Monroe Doctrine in South America and a possible incoming conflict in the Middle East with Iran. Therefore, China is slowly increasing its presence as security guarantor, providing sale and arm transfer at quite reasonable financial supported price, military training.
I will get you to outline those four pillars in just a moment, but for now, if I could just very quickly sum up. So a distracted superpower, that's the United States. Russia, it has been involved, not just with the Wagner Group, now as the African Corps. It has been involved both in terms of troops as well as in terms of weapons supplies. But Russia as well, arguably distracted by its own problems in Ukraine, and China seizing that moment to move into this space. Very quickly, let's sum up, and you are explaining how they might be doing that via various ways. Pardon me, if you could just give us those ways right now.
Correctly. Definitely, Russia involvement in the invasion of Ukraine is absorbing more of the resource, and at the same time it lost the logistic support in Syria with the port of Tartus and the military airbase of Hamnein that was linking Africa with the military logistic. Having said that, China, contrary to other powers, like for example from France, is not putting boots on the ground. Still abide to the decade-old principle of non-interference, meaning that is not sending any soon People Liberation Army to protect its interests along the Belt and Road. What China is doing is related to four pillars. The first is arm transfer, as I mentioned, and according to CIPRI, in West Africa in 2023-2024, China was the main exporter of this light weapon system. Then it's military training. China is training a lot of military academy all over the region in order to provide the support for the country to defend themselves. There is an increase of port call for the PLA Navy. Just recently, under the BRICS aegis in South Africa, Chinese Navy have been training with Russian and Iranian ship. And last but not least, China is integrating its economic power and financial support to integrate this expanding security. And of course, as I mentioned, PLA is not moving any soon without a mandate from the Central Military Commission. Therefore, security is entitled to Chinese private security company who are protecting infrastructure and individual under the Belt and Road in Africa.
In a way, China's broad-based economic strategy, we're seeing it being redelivered in a very broad-based, as you just outlined, security strategy. In parallel, we see the United States, I think in its national security strategy, in its paragraphs devoted to Africa, making it very clear that it's now trade over aid and very specific focus on ameliorating specific conflicts and developing ties, trade ties with very specific countries. So the U.S. becoming, in some ways, more like China. Could you say that?
I have to say that the landscape is changing very fast, meaning that trade, of course, it's always very important because most of the countries in Africa are blessed by oil, gas, natural resources from diamond, gold, and rare earth. But at the same time, the problem is security. Civil war is on the rise in a lot of this country. Huge war are still going on for many years. Like South Sudan right now, one of the crises and the main problem is also related to the fact that the neighboring country in Sudan unloaded more than 500,000 of refugees on an economic system that is already fragile. Therefore, what there is really need to do right now is not just increasing trade, but as China in some respect is doing, is increasing the likelihood for the local population to work more on agricultural and to develop very talented young resources instead of just joining the military or even worse, jihadist and terrorist group.
Oh, thanks so much for that. Dr. Alessandro Arduino, breaking down this movement from the economic footprint to an equally broad-based security footprint. Dr. Arduino speaking to us there from London. Still ahead on this bulletin, India extends its AI summit by one more day as Prime Minister Narendra Modi seeks backing for a joint declaration on practical AI applications. And a look at why Chinese biotech firms are choosing to license their breakthroughs to multinationals instead of going global themselves. India's extended its AI Impact Summit by a day after record crowds turned up to see the latest breakthroughs in New Delhi. Prime Minister Narendra Modi today calling for AI to be democratized and not controlled by a handful of powers, echoing earlier remarks by UN Secretary-General Antonio Guterres, the UN chief today pushing for a new expert panel to ensure human control of artificial intelligence in response to a safety report that warns of its growing misuse. But not all parties agree that regulation is the right way to go. The White House saying today it totally rejects global governance of that technology, adding that AI adoption cannot be subject to, quote, bureaucracies. Remarks by the US coming ahead of a leaders' declaration, which is expected to lay out a roadmap for global AI governance, as more countries try to take the lead on rules, safety, and establishing trust. And more Ershan Gar covering the summit for CNA live from New Delhi. Ershan, panel discussions today from many leaders, business and world leaders on AI safety and governance. Is there anything that has stood out?
Well, the panel discussions have focused on how to use AI safely and the various risks not only AI presents to society, but the risks which are inherent in the way models are functioning. A report that was unveiled during the AI summit here in New Delhi, called the International AI Safety Report, touches upon many of them. One of them, of course, is a kind of risk that we have seen multiple examples of since the advent of fake news and social media. The report says that AI can actually turbocharge this problem and make it a whole lot worse. It also says that AI can actually make cybersecurity a massive problem, because the report says that in one instance they found that artificial intelligence was able to find out 77% of vulnerabilities in a software system, more than what humans could find. And it also goes on to add that current AI systems also have inbuilt issues where you might see AI models, large language models particularly, hallucinating and giving out false information, not because of biases built in them, but simply because on some occasions they just don't work well. It also touches upon some of the more unquantifiable, as of now, issues with artificial intelligence systems, which includes how people might be becoming more reliant on using AI chatbots for things like gaining access to information, or even in some cases for emotional support. And that's just some of the risks they have identified. But as stakeholders are looking at the risks, countries have been focused on how they can bolster the bedrock of the technology that everybody's been talking about for the past 5 days. US Ambassador Sergio Gore said this while he welcomed India into the US-led Pax Silica initiative.
We can share trusted AI technology with the world, and especially with partners like India. And critically, India brings strength. Peace doesn't come from hoping adversaries will play fair. We all know they won't. Peace comes through strength. India understands this. India understands strong borders. India understands this part of the world. That strength, that sovereignty, is exactly what Pax Silica amplifies. AI, space, and advanced semiconductors are developed, deployed, and controlled by free nations. And we're doing it in a partnership with the world's largest democracy, a nation of 1.4 billion people that share our values and our vision. We welcome India joining to co-found the future. Pax Silica is about whether free societies will control the commanding heights of the global economy.
With this initiative, now India is being seen as making its footprint known on the world of artificial intelligence, and also a signal that India-US ties might finally be improving.
Darshan, joining a pact like Pax Silica, relatively easy compared to actually reaching an agreement on anything related to AI. Can we expect any commitment or deliverables today?
Well, some of the things that we are expecting from the joint declaration of leaders include things that have been touched upon already by various leaders who've been present here, including Prime Minister Narendra Modi, President Emmanuel Macron, and the CEOs of tech companies like OpenAI, Google, and Anthropic. And these include the very first idea that AI needs to become more accessible, and it needs to become useful for people who might not know the first thing about technology. So ensuring that the benefits of AI reach the grassroots level, we can expect something on those grounds in the joint declaration. The next idea could be how various AI models and codes need to be open source, because Prime Minister Modi has called on like-minded countries to have open source code so that they can collaborate and make AI systems safer. And finally, we'll also expect India to push for having some language included about the safety of AI, particularly on protecting children and minors from AI content that is online. It will remain to be seen if these are actually commitment or pledges that the countries will make and companies will make in an effort to move in a common direction.
Well, thanks so much, Urshan Gagda, covering the summit, the AI summit for CNA from New Delhi. Chinese biotech companies are making breakthroughs from cancer therapies to weight control treatments. Many are in clinical trials. But when the new drugs reach patients, that will not be under a Chinese brand name. That's because Chinese drug makers have been choosing to license out their discoveries to multinationals, rather than taking them global on their own. Tan Yu Guan follows the money to ask why in part 2 of our series on China's pharmaceutical industry.
In most places, generic medicines are typically cheaper than their brand name counterparts. But in China, the price gap can be much wider. Take this flu medication, for example. If I buy the branded version Tamiflu from the pharmacy, it costs me about 215 yuan, or about $31. But the generic version from the public hospital costs about 20 yuan, or about $3, more than 10 times cheaper. China is able to capitalize on its huge population and patient numbers. It pools drug demand from public hospitals nationwide and runs volume-based tenders, offering drug makers guaranteed sales volumes in exchange for much lower prices. But there's been a flip side. Dai Jialing has been covering China's pharma sector for over 17 years.
你比如说，10年前投的公司 IPO 了之后，我的市值也非常好，我的流动性也非常好，然后一级市场的钱拿回来，我再反投到这个行业里面，这就形成了一个良性循环。集采就是把药价压得很低了之后，估值就受到了质疑，那几年就造成了整个资金链的断裂。
But that funding crisis also led Chinese pharma companies to move in a whole new direction.
A lot of biopharma companies in China actually very enthusiastically looking to expand outside of China. In the past 1 or 2 years, 32% of the global out-licensing value actually come from products of Chinese origins.
Ray Lim is a former marketing executive at multinational pharmaceutical companies. He sees another force at work, pushing Chinese companies to license out their new drugs rather than going global on their own.
It comes down to the market perception. Yeah, people are still looking at China as a generics market. China has actually moved beyond that. They are actually very innovative. Unfortunately, the market perception has not actually seen this.
But attitudes are changing for those in the know within the global pharma sector. As founder and CEO of Chinese biotech firm Duality Bio, John Chu sees that change firsthand in more ways than one.
以前的话确实是有一些质量问题，现在的话已经好很多了。因为中国做过很多的整顿，中国对生产、对监管的要求到了一个近乎苛刻的程度。说实话，比美国的标准可能还要高。我们现在很多呢都已经陆陆续续通过了 FDA 的 inspection。中国不再是做原料药，不再是做仿制药，我们在做创新药。你可以看到跨国药企的 CEO 组团挑选中国的 biotech， 挨个的去拜访，说：“诶，我们对你的 innovation 很感兴趣，我们希望跟你合作。”这种认可，说实话比什么都强。
And the pace of these cross-border partnerships is accelerating fast. Official figures show Chinese pharmaceutical companies signed 94 out-licensing deals in 2024. That number surged to 157 in 2025. Deal values climbed even faster, more than doubling from nearly $52 billion to $136 billion in just 1 year. Beyond validating China's growing strength in drug innovation, these deals serve another crucial purpose. They provide a vital funding lifeline. Because at home, drug making in China is expected to serve a broader social mission.
My view is this would be a commodity. This would be a social welfare. If you look at the prioritization of the 15th, 5-year plan, general wealth, living standard, equality, of the retail people is on the agenda and highest priority. So as an investor, I would invest in those companies, but I would not expect they are able to make a really high profit margin because I think this is a social welfare issue.
So is this differences in governing systems that's turning this pharmaceutical collaboration into one of the few bright spots of cooperation in this era of technological rivalry? With breakthroughs in weight control drugs, cancer therapies, and treatments for some of the world's most serious diseases in the pipeline, keeping this cooperation alive will not just sustain China's biotech companies, it will ultimately benefit patients everywhere. Tan Yu-Guan, CNA, Shanghai.
And on Monday, in the final installment of our three-part special on China's pharma industry, we explained the promise of artificial intelligence in spurring innovation in that sector. Could we see AI help invent new drugs for the market in the future, or is that just hype? That's this Friday's edition of East Asia Tonight. Headlines anytime at cna.asia. Plus, we're on Facebook and YouTube.